All right, we are going to get going. Welcome everyone to this installment of our nonprofit Bistro Live webinar series, the dynamic board staff relationship, the staff perspective, a panel session. And it's so great to have everyone here again today for another panel session. My name is Scott Vaughn. Working with me at today's session is Shana Shawtuzi. We are with the Community Development Unit of Alberta Culture and Status of Women. And we have a wonderful panel that'll help us explore our topic today. And I'll introduce our panel guests in just a few minutes. So the panel session aim of the dynamic board staff relationship staff perspective is it's aimed at an introductory level for board and staff associated with governing boards of nonprofit organizations in Alberta. There's also going to be a second panel in the spring with new panel members that'll explore the dynamic board staff relationship from a board perspective. Now, on the panel members we have today also have a board perspective too, but the emphasis today is going to be more of the staff perspective. So another part is that today is an exploratory journey of the dynamic board staff relationship from the perspective of three people that have lived it a lot, from both as senior staff and board perspectives with nonprofit organizations. And we'll have the opportunity to learn from their experiences and insights that they share. But before we move right into that, we just want to share with you other webinars for those that do come our way for sessions. You'll see these training webinars are ones that you've heard about before. But for those of you that have not, you can see that we have a webinar series, Goal and Topics, and it's all about board members of nonprofit organizations having the knowledge, skills, and tools to be successful. And you can see the other sessions coming up this spring. We just finished a winter series, but starting in the spring, there'll be another set of sessions that you can register for. There's a link that Shannon is going to put in the chat box as well right now. That'll show you how that the albertacdu.eventbrite.com, that you can actually go to that right now and register for many of the sessions if you happen to be interested in any of those topic areas in the spring. The other thing the other area I wanted you to be aware of, which we're part of here today, and we've had a number of sessions in a lot of different areas as part of the nonprofit bistro series. You can these two sessions are coming up in the spring, as I mentioned before. There's also going to be a panel on building consensus, and another dynamic board staff relationship panel in the spring. And of course, you can all take a look at recordings related to all these sessions as well, with the link to the CDU YouTube channel that's also that Shannon's just put into the chat box. Right now, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that we are on the traditional and ancestral homeland of many diverse people of Alberta, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose ancestors have walked and stewarded this land since time immemorial. We recognize our role as settlers on this land, and we're grateful to work, live, and learn on this traditional territory. We're located all across Alberta, acknowledge the land of many peoples presently associated with Treaties 6, 7, and 8. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude. As I mentioned before, we're the Community Development Unit of Alberta Culture and Status of Women. Our unit provides support for nonprofit organizations and community organizations, as well as, of course, public sector organizations in Alberta in various areas. So if you need more information about our services, you can go to our website or give us a call or send us an email to receive more information. Again, that information is in the chat box. I also want to let you know that we're using automatic live captions for this session. So if you want to enable it, please hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen and you'll be able to click on the closed caption button. And then there's a little part where it says show subtitles. So you'll just be clicking on that. If you're connected by a smartphone or an iPad, to access the captions, you just tap on where it says more and then tap on view full transcript. Feel free to put in your comments. We have a chat box, and that chat box is going to be used for some activities and some conversations that we're going to be having with our panel. Feel free to put in your comments, observations in the chat box as we go. Please keep in mind this is a public chat box intended for obtaining your feedback, presenting information, teaching, and learning related to the topic. You can ask a question at any time along the way. but it probably will be answered more likely around when we do our formal Q&A part closer to the end, because we will have some discussions with our panel, with myself and the panel earlier, but then certainly there will be a Q&A portion coming a little later, that where all your thoughts and your questions and that you'd like to ask can be certainly asked of the panel. And so, yes, that's the other thing I want to mention is that the information presented and the other material and any materials that are part of this are not intended to constitute legal or professional advice. We simply want to share with you information along with myself, moderator, and the panelists that we think will be helpful as you navigate your organization through its operations. And on that note, for your own organization specific situations or questions, you may need to seek the advice from a professional in the related area. And also note that the views and opinions expressed in this webinar with the moderator and the panelists do not necessarily reflect the official position or position of the government of Alberta. So on with the show. On behalf of the Community Development Unit, I'm pleased to introduce our 8th nonprofit bistro, the Dynamic Board Staff Relationship Staff Perspective, the panel session. What's the role of the board in the organization? What's the role of staff and where do they work together? What are the overlaps? What does a healthy board staff relationship look like? What is the relationship between the key players? These are some of the questions. We're going to spend some time together to explore more in this session. So to do so, we are very fortunate to have 3 knowledgeable and experienced panelists that have served in both board and staff roles in various nonprofit organizations and have been able to successfully build relationships and navigate the dynamic board staff relationships, within the whole nonprofit sector, in Alberta. They're going to share their experiences, they're going to share their stories, they're going to discuss some tips and tricks from their perspective, and certainly lessons learned that we can all learn from. And so I'm very feel really good to introduce them now. And the first person is Deanne Bernard. Deanne is the Rural Development Network's inaugural CEO Executive Director. She has over 17 years of experience in this role and spent over 25 years working in rural Alberta. With this experience, Deanne leads the Rural Development Network in helping communities navigate the landscape of rural development through the Rural Development Network's initiatives such as affordable housing, homelessness, addictions, transportation, immigration, and community sustainability. The Rural Development Network has a vested interest in seeing communities thrive, not just survive, and is well positioned to assist them through complicated processes. Deanne holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science from Simon Fraser University. Since she's moved to Alberta in 1994, she's held positions with government, private industry, and nonprofits, and certainly served on numerous boards. So great to have you here, Deanne. Our next guest that I would like to introduce is Denis Lapierre. Denis loves long walks on the beach, reading IKEA installation manuals, and ballroom dancing. Just kidding. He doesn't like any of those things. He is and has been the executive director at the Learning Center Literacy Association in Edmonton for the past 14 years. During that time, he has been privileged to work alongside some outstanding board members who continue to provide him and the organization with much wisdom, commitment, and support. He has also been a board member himself, including the Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations, the St. Albert Library Board, ResDAC, and he believes that all of these experiences offer him a very interesting perspective regarding volunteer board organizational processes. Great to have you here, Denis. Our final panelist, Michelle Asgard. Michelle Asgard is the former executive director of the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association, ACCA, and that is based in Stony Plain. Michelle has spent just over 16 years working to foster a healthy and vibrant cooperative sector, providing a forum for cooperatives to associate and network with other provincial and national cooperatives, foster the development of community leaders through education, and to provide youth education and leadership. Before joining the ACCA, Michelle spent 22 years working for the Alberta Fish and Wildlife Division of the Alberta government. She's currently is the Director of Client Development for Not-for-Profits in Alberta municipalities, where she works with approximately 1,000 not-for-profit members, supporting them through business services and education opportunities that meet their needs. Michelle has spent 7 years on the board of CDF Canada with the Cooperative Development Foundation of Canada, and is currently the vice chair of that organization. And Michelle holds an associate degree in adult and continuing education with the University of Alberta. So those are the three wonderful guests that we have that were so great to have. We're gonna have some really good discussions, and then we're gonna certainly learn from them as part as we explore the dynamic board staff relationship from the staff perspective. So before we get going and we start having some good conversations with our panel, just a few reminders. The panel session is for board members of governing boards of nonprofit organizations with staff. That's where its strength is, that we're going to be talking about, as opposed to maybe member or management boards. It's aimed at as an introductory, exploratory level discussion of the dynamic board staff relationship, with panel guests sharing their own lived experiences and learnings. The views, opinions, and perspectives of the panel members are their own, from their own experiences, and they're not intended to constitute legal or professional advice and or represent the views of the government of Alberta. And there is going to be Q&A time with our panelists near to the end, but certainly write your questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll include them in the Q&A portion of our panel discussion a little bit later. So one other thing we just want to mention, because this word might be used, will be used quite a few times in the session today, I'm sure. What do we mean by governing board? And for the purposes of today, it's a group of people who are, and again, this comes from definition that comes from Governing Good, Grant McDonald, a very reputable resource that we have in the province for this. So a governing board is a group of people who are legally accountable for providing the leadership and oversight of an incorporated organization. A governing board is usually elected at the organization's annual general meeting from a larger group of members or stakeholders. And the board members, board officers typically include a chair, a president, a treasurer, and a secretary. And there might be some other board officers as well, but those are the ones that are typically that are there. And the term governing boards usually refers to organizations large enough to employ executive or administration staff. So we're going to hear lots about staff again, because we're, from a staff perspective, looking at the dynamic board staff relationship. So that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. And usually the term governing board is synonymous with a policy or policy making board. So that's where, just keep that as kind of a working definition, kind of a given for our conversations today. So we do have a warm-up questions for participants first. Then we're going to definitely move it to the panel for the rest of the discussion, but we'd like to get some thoughts from all of you first. We would like to hear from you. What do you feel are the primary areas of focus for the board and staff in a governing board of a nonprofit organization? And we're going to put up, and again, for those of you folks that have been part of our sessions before, they're quite familiar with, but we're going to put up a Jamboard, and you're going to provide your thoughts on the Jamboard. And I'm just going to just show just a quick little tutorial on the Jamboard if you haven't used it before. This particular Jamboard is going to be set up as a T-chart, because we're going to talk about primaries of focus for the board and staff from your perspective. And so you can see it's broken up into board and staff. So here's how you utilize it. You'll see, there'll be the Jamboard link is in the chat box right now. So all you have to do is click on that link, and then you'll come to this page that I have on the screen right now. On the fourth icon down, you can see it says sticky notes. Click on that sticky note, and you could say, let's say, you have something for the board side. You just type in approve policy. You click save and cancel, and then you can just put that one right there like that. And the same thing as if you, let's say it's on, you wanted something for staff, go down to that fourth icon again. You might have implement policy for staff, and you need to put in what you think, but I just thought I want to make sure everybody's clear on how to utilize the Jamboard. And again, there's no right or wrong answers here. We just want to hear from all of you towards that end. I see many coming in there right now. That's great. So yes, populate that Jamboard just like you see that everybody's doing right now. And we'll get a chance to get what everybody thinks each of those, so what's the primary areas of focus for board and staff. For some reason, if you have trouble accessing the Jamboard, and that can happen when there's a lot going on, a lot of people trying to access it all at once, just put your thought in the chat box, and Shannon and I will make sure that we add it to the Jamboard. So we'll give everybody a minute or two to do that right now. Lots coming in there. Great. So certainly on the board side, we're seeing a lot of strategic plans about approving the budget. They're seeing on that side, lots around the budgets in that side. Again, keyword for approving, providing support to the ED, due diligence towards financial responsibilities, policies, practices, procedures. We're seeing things about the board identify organizational direction through the plan. Again, a little bit more about the plan, why that's so important from the board perspective. Looking at, again, approving policies. So there are lots of there. Let's take a look over the staff side that we see there. Volunteer management, talking about determining procedures, program delivery, providing insight to policy, day-to-day finances, day-to-day operations, establishing the key performance indicators. That's the KPIs there, in case anybody wasn't clear what they were. Definitely lots of operations, day-to-day finances, managing day-to-day operations as part there. So keep them coming, folks. We just wanted to just to get everybody's mind around the topic area, and you may get a chance to share your thoughts on the topic area. So thank you for all the ideas that are coming in there, fast and furious. That's wonderful, and I'm sure our panelists will look at that. We'll draw upon those too as well. Some of your thoughts that you had. All right, I am going to pull. You keep them coming though, but you're going to pull it because our panel members will still be seeing these. But I'm going to pull that off right now. And as we move into the next area that I want to go to, and just give me a second here. So one of the things that we do want to talk about right now, as we have a chance with our panel, they're all, you can see them in front of us, and we're going to move right into the area of, first of all, because we're going to task them a little bit too about those primary areas of focus, but before we do that, we're going to talk about share a few experiences that each of you have had as a senior staff person working with the boards that you've been a part of, kind of getting a chance for everybody to just know you a little bit more, hear your voices, just to share experience or two, just so everybody gets to know a little bit more about you that are with us today. So Deanne, start us off. Share us a few things, some of your experiences around working in a not-for-profit organization that you have in many different ways, both board and staff and senior staff.
Thanks, Scott. So just for a little background, I've been the executive director of 2 different organizations. The first was an organization called Erica, where I was the executive director for just over 5 years, and now I'm with the RDN, where I've been for almost 13 years. I had the advantage of being the first executive director of both those organizations, so I can't speak to the experience of coming into an organization that's already in existence. But I will say probably the best thing I ever did after I became an executive director was to join a board, because that gave me this perspective of, knowing what it's like to be the ED, but also knowing what it's like to be on the board. And the first thing I learned from that was not to take questions personally. So I saw other executive directors, they get asked questions and they feel like, they take it personally and feel maybe offended. Why are you asking me that question? But as a board member, I realized, you don't really see what's going on. So the only way you learn is by asking questions, and they're not meant to be offensive. So that was a really good experience that I had, and that I would highly encourage anybody who's an ED or thinking about being an ED is join a board and find out what it feels like on the other side. And then you'll be able to look at things from both sides, because, you know, one of the key messages will be that you need to develop trust, whether you're the board or whether you're the staff. And it's a two-way street. And, you know, the best way to do that is to understand what the other person or the other group's going through. So is that a good start, Scott?
That's definitely a really good start. Thanks, Deanne. Yeah, for sharing that part. Just was a key part that you've remembered right from the start. So thank you for that, Deanne. Deanne or Denis, what is when you think back to an experience you want to share that you might want to share with others? What might that be? Unmute yourself, Denis.
Yeah, I don't know if my sharing my experiences will have any relevance for anyone, but I just thank you, Scott, and thank you for all those of you that have chosen to attend and taken some time out in your day. That's great to see these numbers. Okay, so I would say from my experiences being involved as an executive director, being a board member on different boards, the one sort of, for me anyway, it all boils down to luck. Okay, I have been lucky because with the board that I'm presently with, yeah, there's just a strong element of luck there. I don't think it was as a result of any effort on my part, any effort on their part, but underlying that luck was that I happened to have joined an organization whereby everyone could articulate the mission and the vision at the snap of a finger. And I've also been involved with organization where I call it mission drift, vision drift. And when you talk to someone, they've forgotten the essential purpose of the organization. And and I think that's an important element, although it's underpinned by luck. I was lucky because I was looking for something. And when I saw the vision and mission of this organization, it matched my understanding, my values, etc. And then soon discovered that the board they were all like that. So that makes your job easy. So that's really being lucky. But I think it's also an important lesson for anyone. If you're going to be involved with any sort of human endeavor, you've got to be consistent with what you're doing. Otherwise, and we'll talk about this later, otherwise you do get into some issues that you'd rather avoid later down the line. So it also permeates down to your staff. So anyone that we employ here at the Learning Center, we expect them to be fully cognizant and reminded of the mission and vision statement of this organization, because when we're having a discussion, then that's our referential point. Okay, yeah. So I guess that aids in good communication. It sort of is necessary in terms of avoiding the nonsense that can come later on, because we know that exists as well. But if I had to rewrite my life story, it would be peppered with luck everywhere when there were good things that have come about. So that's sort of my sharing.
So I heard about luck, but also the importance of the vision and mission, and staying knowing it, and also staying in that way and not drifting away to some other areas. Yeah, thanks Denis, for your thoughts there, your key experience learning that we heard. Over to you, Michelle. What is an experience that that you want to share with us that might be helpful for all of us?
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel, and for the lovely introduction, and hello to everybody. So I think one of the key things that I took away right when I started with ACCA, or with the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association, was 2 weeks into ending my 22-year career with the government and going into a not-for-profit, which is a major shift, was being pulled into my office and with two board chairs of two different organizations. And they let me know that part of one of the first things I would be doing as their new executive director is to doing an amalgamation of two organizations. And that was a bit of a shock because that's certainly in the, is that me? I'm sorry if it is. It's getting some feedback.
Yeah.
That didn't come up in any of the interviews that I went through. And I went through a couple of pretty intense interviews when I was going through the process. So I could look at this one of two ways. One, shy away from it. And it wasn't that long after I started that I probably could have went back and did my old job, which, when I sat down and thought about it, that really wasn't an option. Or pick up this challenge and run with it and do the very best I could as their new executive director. And I picked the challenge, certainly. And so what that experience did for me is working with two separate boards, of which only the board, when I started with ACCA, we weren't the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association because it was an amalgamation that we were successful in doing over about a 1.5 year span. So really learned from that experience and how to navigate two boards and their vision and mission of what this new organization was going to look like. So if I fast forward to my board of directors work that I'm doing on CDF Canada, when I started with that board, again, we were going through an amalgamation. So I could take the experience as an executive director and that part, and then move it into amalgamating another two organizations together on an international level. And that was a great experience. And I really want to echo Deanne's statement about, getting on a board and understanding now of a board member and staff, because I really could understand where a staff perspective would be in terms of an amalgamation and where at the end of the day everybody was going to sit. Do they have jobs? Do they not have jobs? How does this look like? So those, I think, something that I treasure, those that work with amalgamating organizations and really understanding perspectives.
Okay. Yeah, seeing it both from board and staff, and seeing those perspectives both from those vantage points is important. And even part of the work, as you said, with your amalgamation, some of that work where you worked a little, at another level with your organizations you were involved with. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. One of the things I want to circle back here a little bit right now is, and you mentioned that, you identified healthy relationships, that things were really well. Denise said I was the luckiest guy in the world that working with a learning center. But I really want to dive into that area a little bit. What from your thoughts are, what does a healthy dynamic relationship look like between board and staff? I think, we will take a look at what are the challenges, what are some of the difficulties, and what does that look like? But first of all, let's be very clear. Because we have a lot of organizations sometimes that they're new to being on a board that are with us today, people that maybe as a new staff person. What does from your perspective, does a healthy dynamic relationship look like between board and staff? Let's start. Let's wade into that with Denis. Just your thoughts there. What does that look like?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Big, broad question there. What does it look like? I think, from my perspective, it's like any sort of governing structure. We work with each other, we participate together, and are we each other's loyal opposition? Okay, so I think there needs to always be robust discussions. I think there has to be a great deal of space for conversation. I think it also involves a healthy analysis of your board composition, I think, as well, in terms of, is it reflecting what we see out there in today's society? So in our community, we're a community-based organization. So then, the diversity is an important thing on our board. It's an important aspect. Do we have spaces by which that have been created by which we can have those healthy, robust conversations? And oftentimes they can lead to some controversial discussions, but I think at the end of the day, when you've reassembled the crew, you go back to what it is that we purport to do. Are we moving forward, or do we get caught up in if you will, the minutiae of moments? Okay. And again, I've been lucky here because we've been able to have those kinds of those kinds of opportunities, and also those kinds of conversations where we are each other's loyal opposition. Now, having said that, on the board, and I'm talking about the board, you're referencing the board, but I jump into the fray as well, as you know. And, you know, but again, going back to our mission and our vision, does it relate? Is it related to it? Are we moving the agenda forward on it? Okay, so I think, you know, it's like if you've ever read the book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, you know, to describe quality is difficult to do. The minute you start to describe quality, you lose the essential aspects of it. So you know when you're engaged in those kinds of discussions, you know when you're engaged in those kind of activities, if you're moving forward. And we're lucky because we're a learning center, so we see everything as learning opportunities, and I think that's really important and critical.
Okay, so thank you, Denis. So certainly, the key part about making sure you have a environment where you can have conversations, you know, constructively, that are certainly important conversations, and everybody understands that those conversations are you know, we need to have, but the culture, the environment to have them is safe, and we can have them quite well. Yeah, thanks for Denis for that thought. Deanne, what are your thoughts? Want to chime in on that? What is from your experience what a healthy relationship looks like between board and staff for our listeners? What might be, what would you look at? What do you pinpoint?
Thanks, Scott. So the first thing I want to note is that every board is different and unique, and what a healthy relationship looks like is going to look different on a different board, and it's going to change over time. You're going to hear the word trust come out of my mouth a lot of times, and the key thing to have a healthy relationship is to have that trust, that, you know, both-way trust. But, you know, you don't just walk into a position, whether you're the board chair or a board member or an executive director, and just automatically have trust. That has to develop over time, and it depends on the people themselves. Some people walk in sort of more ready to trust until they don't have a reason to. Other people need to build that up. And it can depend a lot on experience. So my very first board position, so I'm new to this, even though I was the first executive director, the board chair was not new. He'd been a board chair before. And he was quite nervous because I wasn't experienced. So we spent a lot of time together. And he pretty much talked to me almost every day for the first month or two, and then, you know, gradually got less and less. But he needed to make sure he felt comfortable. And I just wanted to make sure that, you know, he felt comfortable, so I was willing to do what he needed. It was a great opportunity for us to really bond and get on the same page. So that was great. When I came into my current role, I was experienced, my board chair was experienced. So we spent a lot less time together. We just naturally assumed we both knew what we were doing. But it's really going to look different for different people. And I think the key thing is that it's working. So if you're the executive director and you feel like, oh, I like my board, this is good. And if your board says, oh, look at the great staff we have, the executive director is doing a good job. If everybody's happy, then that's a healthy relationship for your particular organization. And like I said, it'll change over time.
So trust is a big part of that, and even spending a little bit more time together early on as you first getting to know each other, especially with the board and yourself as in that role as the executive director, really critical, I'm hearing.
Yeah, especially if it's a brand new executive director, like new to being an executive director, or a brand new board chair, hasn't been a chair before. Spending that time together really helps get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, helps towards building trust. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Michelle, anything else to add to that healthy dynamic relationship? What does it look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add. I do think, you know, both Denny and Deanne have talked about the trust factor. And I mean, that's so huge that I think one thing I'll add is that I found in my experience, when I back to even on the interview side of this, when I was going through that process, I did tons of research around the organization and gave myself time to really reflect on, if I was running this organization, what would my vision be? And so during my interviews, I was able to articulate that. And when I was offered the job and got into that role, that really didn't, it changed a bit about what I thought, because then of course now you're learning about the organization, and so you've got a better understanding of it. But I really felt as the first 6 months to 8 months or year in the role of an executive director, I still by then didn't wane much from that vision that I had, that the board agreed with when at the very first. Now it was a work together. Again, we were amalgamating organizations, so it was a little bit more to it, of course, but it was still the trust they had in me that was my vision, along with the boards, and then we could maintain that vision moving through. So I think that was a big part of that trust factor as well.
Okay, so certainly emphasizing, trust, working together towards building that trust, working to, is a big part of that. Thank you, Michelle. Just looking at it, what are some signs, and we're not going to go too deep here, but what might be some signs, especially for people that are new board members that are out there, or staff that are joining us today, what might be some signs that that you might be moving towards an unhealthy relationship? I mean, all the lack of trust, perhaps the other side of it, but is there any things that there is a sign and we better work on that right now? Is there anything that you might be able to share from your experience, what that might look like? Does anybody want to wade into that one? Okay, Deanne?
I mean, some disagreement and strong discussion is normal. Like, that's great. You should be talking about all the options, and can't expect everyone to be on the same page. But if there are certain issues that keep coming up and people are banging heads on them, or it's every issue you're banging heads on, there's clearly a disconnect between what the board is looking for and or what the staff are there for. So that's one of the key things you can look for. And then, with considering that, sometimes people take things personally when you ask questions. Really, if you're asking your executive director or CEO questions and they seem reluctant to answer, or they're getting annoyed, that's probably not a good sign. And then vice versa, if an ED can't get the board to engage, especially between board meetings, but then even at board meetings, quorums becoming an issue, you have disengaged board members. Those are all kind of red flags that there are some problems, at least in the development, if not already happening, and that you should start, regrouping and rethinking your approach.
Great. Thank you, Deanne. Denis, Michelle, want to weigh in? Any signs that that, boy, I think we need to do a little more work here, even if it didn't, it wasn't a full-grown problem, you were able to catch it early enough? Is there any in those situations that you could share with others on the signs that you might look for if things were maybe going not the path you were hoping, and you were able to turn it around, or not?
Yeah, I think one piece of that would be when, if boards start going around you as an executive director or a CEO, going direct to staff, for example, or staff vice versa. That is certainly an unhealthy situation when that doesn't happen. Or when board comes to you as an executive director, CEO, and bypasses the board chair. That's another sign that there's some issues there as well. So I wanted to add that part.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. just one final thought is, when you were in any of those situations, any strategies to share that you tried, whether they were successful or not, but you thought was a good, what was something that you might have, you've seen done, or you heard that done, or you've done when you realize this sign is is there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the sign, if I can interject here, Scott, the sign that you would be referring to is usually quite off. And I've only experienced, I have to tell you, one time in 14 years. But the sign, but I've experienced on other boards that I've served on. But my own particular board only one time in 14 years. And the signs are visible to everyone. Yeah. It's not you as an ED that's noticing it. Your other board members are noticing it. And it's typically a result of the mission vision creep. Okay, so someone's come in typically with a particular point of, well, not even, I wouldn't even describe it as a point of view, but are typically coming in with an item that they would like to insert into board procedures, board practices, organizational programming and whatnot, yet that is not all that obvious, okay? But not all that obvious for the person that's bringing it up. Very obvious to other people that are sitting around the table, okay? So it usually takes someone, it usually takes people aback a bit because, you've been going along swimmingly and all of a sudden there's this insertion that's come out of the blue. So that's what I mean. Typically everyone recognizes the signs, right? How we've dealt with it in the past, if you want to kind of like how we've dealt with it, is that we've retreated from that. No one would directly confront that particular person. Then you would retreat from it. We would have a discussion with the board chair. We would confirm each other's perceptions. And then, okay, what is it? In the analysis of why is it happening? And then at the next board meeting, then we would dealt with it very directly. Okay, not personalizing it. Just again, here's our mission, here's our vision. We had a discussion at the last meeting. Now, how do we reconcile that moving forward? Because we've got to deal with it before we can move forward. You run into difficulties when you don't deal with things, okay? And it's allowed to snowball because after a certain period of time, no matter what organizational structure you're in, you almost are acculturated to it. And, everybody wants to be everybody's friends, no matter what aspect of life that you would be working in, organizing with, whatever. We want to be each other's friends, okay? And I go back to my concept of the loyal opposition. But that also means that we can be frank, direct, forward, and civil, okay? But we need to call a spade a spade. Otherwise, if you don't do it, and I've sat as a board member on another board, and that doesn't turn out well if you don't deal with it right away.
Right. So there's things that are festering. There's things that just need to be addressed before, like you said, go forward. Make sure you do it. Deal with that. With the elephant in the room or whatever the challenge is. Make sure, just don't let it, ignore it. Try to put blinders to it. Yeah. Thank you, Denise. Michelle, did you want to weigh in there? Yep.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing, and that's remembering what the mission and vision of the organization is, and that everybody is to be going in that direction. So, and that's something that we all have to be reminded of, whether your senior staff or the board, every once in a while. And I agree, Denny, what Denny said around, sometimes you do have board members coming on that may have a vision. They've seen something when they weren't board members from a member perspective, and now coming on to see if they can help right that ship that they think is going in a direction that is not helpful. And so it's just, it's for the betterment of the organization as a whole, not for the individual. And that's a really, from my perspective, a really important thing that everybody has to be reminded of. And so things like, every board meeting, come in and just reiterate what that mission and vision is, and that, that's what we're all here for in that room.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, Deanne, yes, we would please add.
Sorry, I'll weigh in too, because I think
Yeah.
often problems emerge when either the boundaries aren't clear or they're being violated. So sometimes it's helpful to bring in a neutral third party and get everyone to sit down and, because often that's a problem with, somebody doing something that somebody else perceives that they shouldn't be doing, or not doing something they should be doing. So if you bring in a third party, neutral person to help you all get on the same page, reestablish those boundaries, get everyone to agree, yep, these are the boundaries and I'm going to honor them. That can go a long ways to sort of resetting the situation. And ideally you do that before things get, too carried away. But that third party who can provide that sort of step back and look at things can be very helpful.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Deanne. Just even a neutral third party of some sort that makes sense for, whatever the situation to help out, facilitator of some sort. Thank you, Deanne, on that one. I'm just going to move into another area, and we had a lot of ideas around what the primary areas of focus of board and staff and the JAM board that we had from our participants today. And I'm sure there's those are pretty they reflect a pretty good understanding of the roles of board and staff in that JAM board. But the question I'm going to ask you is, there's a saying, we're going to that overreach area a little bit. Here's what the roles are, but what happens when there's overreach? There's a saying out there, nose in, fingers out. Some people that have attended our webinars, they've heard that terminology a little bit when describing the board's role, the nose in, fingers out. I would like each of you, if you would, just comment on that a little bit. What's from your perspective, is that mean to you, that word, nose in, fingers out? I'm going to start with, let's go, Michelle, start with you in this one.
Okay, thank you. So from my experience, the board has a strategic direction that they set out, and that's through, as has been mentioned, through the strategic plan. So it was my responsibility to operationalize that strategic plan and still have the oversight from the board, but not actually have them be part of how it gets operationalized and how my staff then delivers those program areas. And so certainly every board meeting, for example, you give your operational reporting and have a conversation about maybe a perspective. Does this follow the strategic plan that was put out or set out? And but in terms of operationalizing it, that's where the executive director, myself, then had the opportunity to work with the staff to make sure that was delivered on behalf of the board's strategic plan. And so from my perspective, that's a nose in, fingers out situation. And the board that I worked with at ACCA were very much that, and they were very respectful of that. And the board that I was on as well, that's the way that we ran that the executive director did the operationalizing of it, and the board was just there for oversight.
And Doug just mentioned it on the chat box too, with your conversation about the board, it's trust but verify, make sure there's trust there but verify. So again, connecting into some of the points you made there, Michelle. Others, anybody else want to wade into the nose in, fingers out one? Deanne or Denise? Deanne?
Sure. So it goes back to what I said about every organization is different. So overreach in one organization may be, normal operations in another. It's back to what everybody's comfortable with. And then it also goes back to what I said about making sure you have clear boundaries. If in your organization, this is what the board does and this is what staff do, then you can identify overreach very easily. But I think the most important thing is to honor the way the board chair and the executive director relationship is supposed to work. Really, they're supposed to be the main line of communication. So staff shouldn't be going to the board and the board shouldn't be going to staff. Communication should always go from the board to the chair, to the ED, to the staff, or the other way, staff, ED, board, or chair to board, right? That's the most important thing, because if you start bypassing the chair or the ED, that is going to create problems. And I don't know any organization that would be acceptable in.
Right. So certainly understanding that key relationship that the board and being the board chair has with the ED or the senior staff person is really important. Make sure that's being respected and understood, not that you're going around. The very key point that you made there. Dr. Sean Haynes mentioned adding to the whole part of the board. Would you even add the word validate as another part of board's role, that the knows in, certainly knows in, figures out, but the board's role speaks to validating on that. So yes, that added. So good thoughts there. I do want to now kind of move into that area of looking at the chair and senior staff person. We've been kind of speaking to it a little bit already, but let's wade in there a little bit more. I'd like to, again, with you're not here to mention names or difficult situations, but just so we can learn from a general look into this area. The chair and the senior staff person, when you had a really good relationship, what was happening when it was good? And I think you've already alluded to a few things I've heard already, but let's go down this path a little bit more. But even more than that, here's what made it good, and what were some of those factors, those things that made it good? What is, it was good, but even more than that, what made it good? That's really would like to delve into a little bit here. So who would like to start us down that path of one? Who's anybody? Let's go, Denise. Start us off, Denise.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I have to say I've had experiences on this board, working with this organization with 4 chair people. I would say all of them were absolutely very, very competent in every sense of the word, in terms of their leadership ability. So I have never ever experienced not having a good working relationship with my board chairs here. They've all been effective chairs, because they've always, in a sense, supported, all of them, the 4 of them have always supported a very strong model of, I would say, strategic governance.
Okay. Yeah, because that's where we want to go. What made it good? They both supported strategic governance. They both saw the importance of that. What other key things that really helped?
And the other thing is that they were all very good at communicating with all constituent groups in our organization. So they're good communicators. Okay, so whether they were talking to other board members, they were talking to staff, and I don't mean staff in any official capacity, or even our students here at the Learning Center, who, by the way, are the primary shareholders of our organization. They're the ones with the votes. They all had great effective communication skills and understood the different constituent groups here. They also, to the T, all of them had the full confidence and respect of the other board members. Okay, so that they worked on, but they also came in with that sort of, I don't know if it was natural charm or whatever it was, but they had that characteristic. So those 3 things I think were equally characteristic of those chairs that I've worked with. So I've been lucky. I'm lucky. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Denise. Michelle, what made it good? That when things were working well between the board chair and yourself, and what were those things that made it good? The factors.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think one of the big thing was the common vision. So, and what I mean by that is there was, and it goes again back to the very first comment I think Deanne made around trust, and how that then moves forward through the whole organization, board, and the executive director. So I could talk about anything with my board chair and also the board of directors, like in a board meeting, for example. So with that, then any new ideas we had, or I had to bring new programming in, for example, or have a vision about how we want to achieve a certain goal, it was really a great opportunity for the board and myself to work together to for myself to operationalize that, but have the support from the board of directors, and that they were excited about it in new areas that we could look at. And it built the organization. I know when I started with ACCA, or the Rural Education Development Association at that time, it was an organization that we really did need to, look at constructively. Is this where we want to go? Where's that vision? When we amalgamated, then again, that opened more doors. And so I only ever had two board chairs in all the years I spent at ACCA, and they were fantastic board, chairs, and the boards were really supportive with that. But again, it's around building the excitement within the board and having that trust that you really can talk about anything, and we have each other's kind of backs, and that what again is just set out on that strategy that everybody worked on, that they're seeing the results of that.
Okay, so certainly, again, you mentioned strategy a few times here, and that's being the basis, but we're working together towards that, and that we're seeing the benefits of our successes of getting there, and realizing that that's strengthening that relationship between yourself and the board, as a senior staff person and the board. Okay.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, and I just want to
Yeah.
that excitement, that the board
Exciting.
has to be excited about where they're seeing their organization go as well. And I think that was a really big thing that I had with that board, with my board of directors.
Right, they're seeing progress. You not
Mhm.
only you have a plan, but you see progress towards accomplishing the goals in the plan, and you're sharing it together towards that. Yeah. Again, Deanne, we want to wade into this, taking a look at what are some key things that make it work between the senior staff person, ED, CEO, whatever it might be, and the board chair, the key two people in a dynamic relationship.
Sure, and I have had many board chairs, so I've had a wide variety of experiences, and really I think you can work with anybody if they're predictable. So when you meet with them what to expect. They have a lot of questions, they don't have very many questions, whatever it is, that they're predictable and that their expectations are pretty consistent. It's not like every time you meet with them, they've got a whole new set of expectations. That can become very challenging and frustrating. And that goes down to the mutual respect and trust that we've talked about. But also, it's great, and this is a bit of the gold standard, I think, between the ED and the chair relationship. But to have that ability for both of you to speak very openly and frankly in private, but then always present a united front in public. And I think that is the real key. So when you trust each other and you're comfortable, you can hash things out and not worry about what's going to happen, but in the end, you're going to agree and move forward and show the public your united front, and this is what your organization is all about. So that would be my 2 cents.
It was open, being frank, private conversations, but publicly we share together. We've that's seen that others that are hearing our messaging is hearing that we are very much together from a public perspective. Yeah, thanks for adding that thought, Deanna. One area more that we want to look at, again, the dynamic board staff relationship, from a staff perspective, is we certainly talked about there's different areas of focus. You identified some of those of the board and staff and the JAM board that you did, and I've certainly there's certainly agreement from many that's those are certainly some ones that you had on the JAM board, even from our panel members and others, that's certainly it's a pretty good snapshot of what those are from what you had. But I want to move into the idea that even though there's different primary areas of focus and even roles and responsibilities that board and senior staff, or board and senior staff and staff have, but also the thought around that there's the work of the organization is a cycle of collaboration, communication of board and staff. And recognizing that, yes, there are definitely primary areas of focus that each has. What, just what are some examples, though, even though there is different primary roles of board and staff, what are some examples where board and staff, board and senior staff need to be working together? What are some actual things you work on that we work together in a sort of a cycle of collaboration, working to accomplish important organization work together? What are some of those things that are examples of that? I'd like to hear from our panelists, right now on that one. So Deanne, start us off. What might be some things that, where it all comes together?
Well, I guess the obvious one is strategic planning. That's when the board and the staff work the most closely together to, whether it's the original strategic planning for the organization or the renewal, you do it every couple of years. That's probably one of the key elements or times when you're going to be doing that collaboration. So it's essentially lots of collaboration when you're in a planning and or a growth stage or phase, and less collaboration when you're implementing the plan and when you're more in the maintenance phase of your organization. So that's a short answer.
You're right. So certainly strategic planning is one. I think all three of you, I think, alluded to it, the strategic plan, in our conversation today, and maybe even more in the initial creation of the plan and maybe a little less in the implementation. Yeah, we heard from that one. Just that's good, information to pass on to everybody. Denis, Michelle, want to wade into this conversation?
You want to go first, Michelle?
Oh, thank you. Either way.
Yeah, go ahead,
sure.
Michelle. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I certainly don't disagree with that. That's where we saw a lot of collaboration too. I mean, again, end result is the strategic direction of the organization is from the board of directors, but that conversation of how you operationalize this down to the programming was really important too. But I think another area that we really saw big collaboration at ACCA, we did a number of events, a yearly conference, for example, that we really got the board and the staff and myself all engaged in it. What direction, again, at the end of the day, what were the objectives of those large events? And it was a really great opportunity to collaborate with each other and being able to kind of showcase the organization from a board perspective and all levels of the organization. And those are exciting times for us. And I think at the end of the day, they built a lot of relationships within the structure of the organization. And that was certainly a strong point to the work that we did together.
All right, so event planning, events, period, or an opportunity that working together towards a common goal accomplishment. Yeah, okay, thank you, Michelle. Over to you, Denis.
Thank you, Michelle and Deanne. I'd like to echo Deanne's comments with regards to the strategic planning process is probably one of the areas where you see a lot of collaboration. I'll give you one specific example that we've operationalized here at the Learning Center, which is not related to the strategic plan, but whenever we have a turnover of, let's say, 2 or 3 board members, which occasionally happens, several years ago, the board put into place what we call a panel with outgoing board members. We would take an afternoon with outgoing board members who would meet with the new incoming board members, and they would share their experiences, their thoughts regarding their experiences on the board. They would offer free and easy advice to newcomers that were coming onto the board. And it was also an important sort of moment for us to sort of reconnoiter, come back, and it was important for staff because we would invite everyone there, staff, myself, and the board, and it would provide that opportunity for us to think about some of the exit interviews, like a collective exit interview with former board members that were passing on their sagacious kinds of experiences to the new more board members. But it gave us, as the ED, myself as the ED, and the staff, a time to pause and think about what we were hearing. So we weren't inserting ourselves into the discussion per se, but those observations that were shared with new board members in terms of, you know, how staff, you know, operate at our center, how, you know, the board has conducted business in the past and all that, I think was probably a pretty good example of how everybody was collaborating, you know, again, to set the organization on the right path to maybe, if you're, you know, reestablish the course, if you will. But yeah, it was always always kind of a low psychological, emotional event. So we would, you know, we would bring in food, we would, you know, visit and whatnot. Then we would have this panel. So yeah.
Okay. So I'm hearing even opportunities where, you know, where people hear board verbalizing or staff verbalizing the experience of being part of your organization, and in a like you said, a less formal, more, you know, having coffee or food or celebrating around food together, sharing some insights with each other, board and staff, on our organization and what it's about and what we're doing, and but in a it's kind of a celebratory way, I think I heard. Is that, you know, from what I heard, Denny? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have another additional thoughts of where, you know, where the working together of board and staff, again, we did different roles, different responsibilities, but at the end of the day, coming together for the work of the organization. All right. If not, we're going to move into a little bit into the Q&A. We will have our, you know, each of our panelists is going to give a key message before they leave, but we do want to maybe take a look at some of the questions from everybody here that's been listening in, and some of the thoughts that you had, and I'll pass the question on to our panelists, and they'll, you know, and if they can pass, they can, but if they do want to tackle any of the questions that come forward, please do, and we'll go from there. So let's take a look at, there was a question that we had here, moving into the Q&A. How does a CEO regain a board's trust when, by omission, not commission, something arises that takes the board completely by surprise, which is not mission or vision related? Something come, I guess, out of nowhere, it sounds like, but it's not mission, vision related. And so again, probably, I'm not sure if you get all the contexting that we have in the question, but again, how does a CEO regain a board's trust when, by omission, not commission, something arises that takes the board completely by surprise, which is not vision or mission related? Oh, Deanne wants to tackle that one. Well,
so,
all right.
I mean, I think it's really important to remember that everyone makes mistakes. So sooner or later, and even in a general sense, whether it pertains to vision or mission or not, something's going to go wrong. So I think it's really important, if you're the ED or the CEO, and usually the blame will lie with you, even if you didn't do it, you're where the buck stops. The important thing is to acknowledge what has happened, to ask for forgiveness, you know, say, you know, you've made a mistake and this is what happened. Try not to make excuses, ask, you know, for their understanding, and then, you know, set up better processes so that kind of thing doesn't happen again, if at all possible. Because sometimes it's just a lack of having the right processes to deal with these kinds of things. But, you know, the reality is you can't think of everything, you can't plan for everything, things are going to go wrong. But if you've developed that good, trusting relationship, they're going to overlook a mistake, because, you know, unless it's something, you know, and we're talking about a mistake, not some egregious thing that, you know, somebody was committing fraud or something. It would be a very unusual board that wouldn't be able to forgive it and overlook it, especially if you set up new processes. And if they don't, well, that's probably on them.
Yeah, I like your thought. There's a lot happening in our boards and our organizations, and again, like you said, if it's not a, you know, a big egregious mistake that's hey, we need to have that understanding together that things happen because there's just so much going on, and that having that culture that in place is important. Yeah. Thank you,
I
Deanne.
think,
Yeah, go ahead,
Scott,
Denis.
yeah,
Yes,
it's really hard to determine exactly. That's pretty broad there, but the one part of that statement that kind of concerns me though is that takes the board completely by surprise. Like,
okay.
without knowing more information, but if you take an entire board by surprise, there's something there that needs to be addressed somehow. Because I could see taking one or two board members by surprise, but when you have an entire board by surprise, without additional information there, I would suggest that would need to be whatever way. I would have probably a discussion with my board chair, because if you've lost the confidence of your board, your entire board, that's an entirely different issue.
Right. Kind of goes back to, because I heard a comment, I think from Deanne a little earlier too, is that one thing, that consistency, that board, the staff relationship, the board senior staff relationship is, and that this is so way out there different from that. That's a concern I'm hearing you're saying, Denis, that we need to find out more about that. What's that all about? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah. All right. Let's move into another question here from Charlotte. What does a CEO do when he or she becomes aware that the board chair is trying to undermine his or her leadership of the organization? Now, whether you've experienced that yourself or not, what looking out from your experience, your thoughts working in an organization, when you see a board chair is trying to undermine your leadership, what do you do? How do you deal with that situation? A hard question. Who wants to move into that one first?
And in a word, resign.
The one option A.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, this comes, first thing I think about is, what policies have you got in place to deal with this situation? Because that's one thing that was put in place of those policies around, if this happens where there's an, issue, heaven forbid that should happen with your board chair, who do you go to? So it provides an outlet for the CEO or executive director to be able to go somewhere. And whether that's to your vice chair, or if you've got an HR specialist, someone on your executive of your board that you can have that conversation with. If having a direct conversation with the board chair doesn't get you anywhere, it was important for our organization to make sure that the executive director had some place to land. And so that's where that policy was really, really important.
Right. Thank you for that, Michelle. The importance of policies that speak to those areas, and even, job descriptions, if you will, as well, how important that is. So that way there's some leverage even to have a conversation, I suspect, too. If you don't have that in place at all, you're working from no place. So
yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Good thought of that one. Okay, here's another one. Kind of ties into our overreach area, that conversation that we had a little bit earlier. Is it the ED's responsibilities or the board chair's responsibility to steer board members from straying into staff work? Whose responsibility is it, to board chairs, or is it the ED's? If you start seeing board members are straying into staff's work, whose responsibility is to bring it back, or at least have a conversation, or whatever it might take?
It would be the board chair's responsibility. The ED probably has to bring that to their attention, but it should really be the board talking to I keep saying the board, the chair talking to the board, and the ED talking to staff, and then the ED and the chair talking to each other. That's the way the lines of communication should work, and board members should not be straying into staff work.
Right, certainly reflecting board governance understandings and such that are out there. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Denis, wade in there.
And I would even suggest at that point that it would be you know, if that becomes an issue and more of an issue, is that would require a board meeting without the ED present, because that needs to be straightened out and hammered out by the board. Because you can't expect the board then to be supporting the work of your ED if that's going on, because it becomes dysfunctional. Okay, so that's exclusive to the board and the board chair to rein that kind of situation back to its proper place.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Michelle.
Thanks. Yeah, and one of the boards that I've been on, that actually was more the role of the vice chair. And that we did it that way. It took the initial conversation off of the chair. And that was something that the vice chair could do on their in the chair's stead. If, however, that was, didn't garner the results that we wanted to from a board perspective, then the chair took over and then, had other conversations and possibly other ways of dealing with that board member. But that's also backed up by policy and like board policy, conflict of interest, those kinds of policies that every board member had to sign as well. And so that then gave the kind of the teeth, excuse the term, but to the chair and the vice chair to be able to deal with a board member that were overstepping that, going to staff.
Right. All right. Thank you, Michelle, for adding those thoughts in there as well. It's again, the overreach one is always, a good conversation for, and for many board staff, that dynamic board staff relationship. Again, keep your questions coming in. I'm going to move into one more, and this says in a probably tying into some comments that we've had already, but maybe let's this question was asked here, we can really even emphasize it again. When the chair is not predictable or expectations are never reliable, if you think of those situations that we've chatted about there, what do you do then? When you have 5 new board members and you're on the third ED, the chair's tenure, a lot of unpredictability, a lot of challenges, both board and staff of lack of predictableness. There's things are changing fast, turnovers mighty. Any thoughts that where you might start or what might need to happen in a situation where there's seems to be a lot of factors happening that way?
That might be a really good opportunity to bring in that third party. It sounds like things are kind of going sideways. Time to bring in a experienced facilitator, someone who can moderate. And worst case scenario, and it's tough if you have a bunch of new board members, but in essence, maybe somebody has to go and maybe it's the board chair, but that's a very dangerous conversation to have. But if the board can start to see that, there's a root of the problem, and if the root of the problem is the board chair, then the board can make the decision that they want to remove the board chair. But that's a very, very difficult conversation to have. And it would take somebody on the board to really take the leadership. And it depends on how strong that board chair is. You might have to resort to that last resort that Denis mentioned and resign, but of course that's not going to be good for the organization.
Right. So yeah, difficult situation, but there's some options, and again, resigning might be one of those. But certainly, I like the idea that a third-party facilitator might be the first way that you need to go to see what possibilities might be there to resolve it. Yeah, thank you for Denis, you were thinking about adding something there?
I'm looking at the metrics here. When you have 5 new board members, that's going to complicate things a lot, because it takes them a little bit of time to catch up to, to be brought up to speed and whatnot, or to see and observe what's going on there, because there's obviously some dynamics. But wow, that looks untenable. I mean, who's going to, I kind of like your comments, Dan, but I'm going to who's going to suggest that, because it would seem that the chair is the one that's been there the longest, and I doubt if he wouldn't proffer that kind of solution. That sounds like a nightmare, Scott.
Yeah.
I don't know.
certainly, yeah, there's some difficult ones that, are some strategies we can, I think thank you for letting your listeners know, here's some steps you go, but yes, that is a difficult one. That one is not one that's solved easily, I suspect. And and trust our participants to have some tough questions coming
Yeah,
in.
no kidding.
Yeah,
No.
which is great.
No. I'm not at this moment. I'm feeling really lucky.
Well,
Scott,
let's-
can I just add one more thing
Sure.
to that? Thanks.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe that is an opportune time to do an organizational reset of sorts. Go back to that strategic plan. Is this really what the board is looking for, and those that they represent? Is this still the way the organization should be going? If you've got that many board members that are changing, again, back to your policy of, if you've got a change out of 5 board members, what was the reason for the board members? Because if you have a board of 10, that's half your board. Holy smokes, that's a big, and I'll go back to what Deanne said, every board is different and it's what works for that board. So, keeping that in mind, but if you have a board of 10 and half go at any one time, that's a major, major change in the direction of your board of directors as well. So, you could look at it potentially is kind of that reset of the organization. Again, is this the direction we still want to go? If not, what does that look like? Does it put the executive director in a bit of a difficult position? Absolutely, because you're still trying to operationalize what the previous board set out for you to do. And so, from my perspective, you do the best you can do with that, and move the organization forward. But there may be a time, that happens when you have to look at what is your organization all about.
Yeah, I heard it again, the importance of going back to basics here. What are, vision, mission, what are we all about? Let's spend some time together on, it seems like we're straying far from it from so many different ways, and let's get a singular focus. What are we about? And are we all on board for this? Is this, yeah, thanks, Michelle, for bringing us back even to that, seeing it from that perspective. Yeah, good thought. What about, here's another question coming in. What about a situation regarding a third-party provider you rely on heavily and they're showing incompetence? Is it the chair's responsibility or the ED or joint responsibility to deal with? Or, I'm not sure we have everybody under the third-party provider you're relying heavily on, they're showing incompetence. Is the chair or the ED or the joint responsibility to deal with that? How does, again, talking about who does what, whose job is it? How do you see that one?
That's the ED's job.
Mhm.
Okay, and then obviously the ED would have crafted the agreement in place. So it's really up to the ED to see if those performance outputs or whatever are being met. And if they're not being met, then you just, yeah. To me, that's the easiest one.
That's the easiest one. But I just want to ask you
Yeah.
one more on that. Why is it? Just I get why is it the ED's responsibility? What is makes the basis for that decision? Even though it's it's obvious, but what again for listeners that maybe new to boards and organizations, why is that obvious?
Well, in my situation is that I deal with all of the the daily operations of the organizations. The board are not involved. They're only involved in certain terms of oversight policy decisions. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and we would have a policy governing that, and I would be expected to carry out that, the mandate of that policy.
Right, reflecting those primary areas of focus that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Super. Thanks.
Can we have a few more? Can we have a few more easy ones like that?
Well, we'll see how they're coming here. Let's see if I'm going to throw this one at you. Have you had any experience with the board agenda having an in-camera session where the ED is asked to leave positive and negative outcomes? I just want to even try to answer that question if you can too, but also even around in-camera sessions, your thoughts around in-camera sessions and your experiences with those. But the first one is, have you had any experiences with the board agenda having an in-camera session where the ED is asked to leave, positive or negative? Anybody want to wait in this, Deanne?
I just want to say that in-camera sessions without the ED are not at all unusual. And you shouldn't, goes back to what I said earlier, don't take that personally. Sometimes the board just wants to talk about other things. I mean, it is possible that they're talking about you and they're not happy with you and they're discussing what they need to do about you, but chances are they're just talking about something else. And it could be even good things about you. So I would never take that personally. It's a perfectly normal part of a board agenda. And generally speaking, the board chair should, give you a brief like, oh, this is what we discussed, but it's off the record. It doesn't go into the minutes. So that's why they go in camera.
Right. Okay. So certainly that is something as a senior staff person, EDCO, that is normal. And that conversation is important that they have, and don't take it to personally, but it's certainly that's part of the work of a board and of an organization. Yeah. Good messaging. Thanks, Deanne, for that. Anybody else want to wade into that one? Yeah, probably identified it pretty well.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. All right. Here's one. He said, yeah, Denis, you wanted another tough one. I'm on the executive board of 10, and the ED is one of the staff of only 4. And for financial reasons, it's not possible to hire more paid staff. A lot of fundraising has to happen to keep this organization afloat. Therefore, the board does not stray into staff work due to necessarily, however, therefore the board does stray into staff work due to the necessity. However, the ED has been in their position for 20 plus years and becoming less and less receptive of assistance. Any suggestions to help this organization? Any thoughts around this?
Yeah, Scott, if I just, it'd be nice to get a little bit of clarification on this, but who asked for their assistance to begin with?
Okay,
I would need to know that.
okay, that would help you find out.
And secondly, if it wasn't asked for and it's a policy governance board, then I would suggest that ED probably has every right not to be receptive to that assistance. Okay, so if the ED had initially asked for assistance and now has become disenchanted with that assistance, then it's on the ED. Okay, but in any event, that board and that ED need to sit down and have a good, frank, honest conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Michelle. Yeah.
Sorry, Scott, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I want to
Definitely.
weigh in this also. I mean, assuming, again, part of this conversation is around effectiveness of the ED and becoming less and less receptive to assistance. So I think part of that comes into when you do performance reviews. If this is something that you're seeing kind of as happening over the time span that this person has been sitting in this executive director position, you would think it would come up from time to time in performance reviews. And so again, having that policy in place that those would be done. And, there's a number of areas in there where that question could be asked to the executive director, and the executive director can provide their input and their openness around, do they want it or do they not? Like that's one tool that might be used to help with this situation.
Okay, yes, right back into the importance of policy and having something down that you can work from, not as a starting point versus from scratch and something in an area that happens like that. Yeah, thanks again for bringing that back. That's another way to look at that. Again, I just want to go back to a piece here that Doug talked about in-camera pieces. He seconded that sometimes the in-camera sessions may even be the board discussing their own performance and that they need to have that conversation on their own. Our agendas have in-camera as a standing agenda item so that a request is not a major red flag or taken the wrong way. So there's even an example of what that organization does, an example to follow up. Having said, I will add to my question. The ED has never had a performance review. Well, that adds a little bit more challenge. And I think, what do you think? How important are performance reviews? Let's put that one to our panelists here. What's your thoughts around the importance of performance reviews?
Well, that's on the board. If the board has never reviewed their ED, that should be really up to the board to make sure that happens.
Right. And again, just even pulling on that thread a little bit more too, why are performance reviews so important? In this case, there wasn't one, and that's a big red flag. And but why are performance reviews from senior staff persons like yourself? What's the value and importance of them? Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, it speaks to whether you as the employee, as the executive director, are fulfilling what you set out to do, right? So at the beginning of the year, let's take one step back. We should all have goals, and that is set at the beginning of the year. So at the end of the year, if there's no performance review done, how do you determine whether you've met those goals, half met the goals? Have you, brought the organization forward the way either the board envisioned it, because the goal should have been to work together between the two of you to set that common, where you want. It also gives a bit of a opportunity for you and the board of directors to kind of see, where are you going to be in 5 years, or where are you going to be in 3 years? Like, is there things that you want out of your career within that organization that the board can support you on, whether that's more education, whatever that may be within that performance review. So it really does set the stage for you as an individual or as the employee to govern where you're at, and what does the board, do they think that you've met what's been set out? So I think they're really important.
Deanne, yeah, go ahead, Deanne.
I have to admit, I have a bit of mixed feelings about performance reviews, because on the one hand, I don't think you should wait till that one time a year or however you do it to provide feedback. Feedback should be ongoing. Someone shouldn't have to wait for a year to find out how they're doing. But that said, I think a formal review is really important to document what it is. So the feedback is ongoing, but then once a year you document it. And this is really important, especially if the board isn't super engaged. So that would make sure everyone's on the same page, but it's important to document trends. So, and that's for both the board and the ED. So if every year you show performance is kind of dwindling, then that might set up the stage for the board to eventually say, it's time for you to go. Or on the other hand, if performance is always really great, and then, what sometimes happens is performance is great, performance reviews are good, but I've seen it happen where a new board chair comes in and decides they want to do things differently and wants to get rid of the ED. So this is the ED's, backup to say, hey, you can't just turf me. I have a good performance history, right? But if you haven't done any performance reviews, the board can't say, look, it's time to go. And the ED can't say, oh, look, I have a good or bad record. So despite my mixed feelings, I do think that they're important.
You have mixed feelings. Right. Yeah. I think this one's really nuanced, because I think you need to have something in place, especially to deal with instances that came up in the example there. But I think performance reviews have to be more nuanced than what we traditionally have expected them to be, because they often becomes, the performance reviews that I've gone through typically have been formulaic. There wasn't much learning in those performance reviews. It was something to appease a policy, just to say that we've done it, we've gone on, but there needs to be a deeper look at that whole structure of performance reviews, evaluation and whatnot, because for us here, it's important that it become learning opportunities. But we still exist in hierarchies, so let's not kid ourselves. Okay, and most of the times it's for straight public accountability. But if you're being true to the roots of your organizations and you want them to become learning situations, then we need to start shifting that up. And I have to be honest here, Scott, I haven't seen much of that in the nonprofit world. We're still not as nuanced. We're still attempting to replicate sort of the corporate models that that we're inundated with all the time. But I think it's really important that this area should be looked at a little more closely. But I think there's a place for them. Is it in the current format that I typically see? I don't think so. And you know, the 20-year thing with the ED, no policy is going to resolve that. Okay, there's something long before that started to happen that wasn't attended to, wasn't brought forward. Again, you know, we have a tendency to be on boards and in other human organizations, you know, to be all about affinity. And I don't mean we should be about antipathy, but we need to be certainly not anti-intellectual. Okay, so it's high time that that whole field starts to evolve a little more organically. You know, we can talk about collaboration, we can talk about participatory, but if we look at our structures and how we're governed by rules and regulations of the province, we're still hierarchical. Okay, so no matter how you cut it, oh, this is for your own good. No, it's not that. And let's be honest about it. And I think there needs to be a lot more honesty brought into this whole area. Because, you know, I've worked, maybe I'm going on too long here, but I've worked in situations where the person's had perfect performance reviews. Perfect. But you wouldn't want them on your staff. Okay. So I think it goes a little bit deeper in this again.
Okay, so certainly more nuance, not just checklists, and that needs to be tied to a policy, that kind of thinking. So certainly, I'm just going to squeeze this question in here because I think it's a good little question to add to all this discussion we're going to have. It'll be the last question. We do need to move into do some key messages from each of you. But any suggestions for how CEO goals or executive director goals should be set, or how it should be how, again, we're talking about that evaluation process, performance reviews. How do you set the goals, you know, for your senior staff person? How should that be done? Just a very quick, if each of you could just give a quick thought on that from your experience. Deanne, do you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. It should absolutely be a collaborative process. Like, everybody has to agree that these are the goals. And you know, it can be really tough because a good CEO might have trouble meeting certain goals, and certain other goals might be achievable despite the ED or the CEO. So it's a challenge. But I also recommend 360 reviews, because the board has a very narrow view of what the CEO does and how they're doing it. And it's very easy. I always joke with my board, like, oh, I'm telling you how I'm doing. What do you really know, right? Like, I'm just taking my word for it, right? I mean, obviously, I'm being a little facetious there, but when you do an anonymous survey of staff and an anonymous survey of key stakeholders, I think the board can get a really good picture. And you know, having reasonable goals that the CEO actually has control over and that are measurable is really important. And that's a real challenge, because it's going to look different in every organization.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can, I'd like to go off what Deanne just said too, and that's attainable goals. Definitely you have to have stretch goals as well. But there's got to be a balance between attainable goals and stretch goals within, because typically you're doing your goals for the year from my perspective. So what does that look like that you can attain? And then again, you always have to have one or two stretch goals, I think, to just help you think outside that box, to help you stay within your mission and vision of your organization, but stretch your thinking to where you can get to.
Yeah, I love the combination of attainable and stretch goals together, working together with the board and determining what those are. Okay. All right. Key messages we'd like to hear before we've had a wonderful panel discussion. I think you've been, you know, some of those insights that you've been able to provide, the experiences you've provided, the dynamic board staff relationship. It's a big part of a building strong teams, effective relationships webinar session we have. And that's why we wanted to have this, bring people in like yourself that have to live and breathe it every day and share those thoughts. So what is a key, like each of you, if you could just give us a key message before we leave today for our listeners. What is a key message, whether it's something that you want to mention again that you mentioned earlier, or a key message that's completely different, whatever, somewhere in between? What is a key message that each of you could share with us before we leave? So I'm going to start with Michelle. What is a key message from your perspective?
Thanks, Scott. And this, from my perspective too, this has been a great, I learned, from Deanne and Denny as well today. So thank you for your input into this panel. I think one of the key messages that I take away from is, as an ED or a CEO of an organization, you are hired for your confidence and your vision and what you see in this organization. And I think that's really important when you get into the, operate again, having to move forward the organization in the operations, that there was a reason that board of directors hired you. You were the best candidate for that position, and to be confident in that. And you're going to be thrown, curveballs all the time. But, if you can navigate the system, use people. I mean, one of the things that I recognized fairly early on in my executive director role was there is lots of people out there that are way better at what I did and what I do. And so I really utilize that. Mentors was a big thing for me. Whether that was a strategy mentor or a personal mentor to help me through, just to throw things, to whatever the case may be. I really felt that that was a huge help to me. And again, I mean, the confidence in what you're doing, and that they hired you for that. And best of luck to every executive director and CEO doing this role. It's not an easy role to do. And I know when I first moved into that role, somebody said to me, well, you didn't get this role to make friends. I'm like, oh boy, so I hope that's not the case, but in a lot of times that may be. So that would be my ending comments.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Michelle. Really appreciate them. Denis, key message from you.
Thanks, Scott, and I'd like to echo Michelle's thoughts there. Thank you, my fellow panel members. My key thought is, if you're not having fun, quit. I mean, there's a lot of things that you shouldn't be all too concerned about, given everything that we are living through in today's world, the pandemic, the Ukrainian crisis and whatnot. But I mean, I think for both EDs and board members is that you really, and I go back to this all the time, I wouldn't be working with you if I couldn't subscribe to the vision and the mission of this organization. And I think it's really predicated on that. Be in learning mode all the time. Leave yourself open to serendipity. Leave yourself opening to the questioning of previously, maybe your previously entrenched positions, or to our board's previously entrenched positions, but always consider every situation a learning opportunity, and attempt not to let don't get overtaken and overwhelmed by anything that's really not that critically important. And you might be the voice, either as an ED or a board member, you might be the voice that sort of rights the ship's path back to what the organization was originally founded upon. So yeah.
All right, thank you for make sure it's fun. That one message I heard from you, Denis, and certainly make sure you're, the whole idea is that what's truly important. Don't get caught up in some of that other stuff. That thank you, Denis. Deanne, you got the final word on the key message. All yours.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you both, Michelle and Denis. This has been really interesting for me too. So my key messages would be to remember that you can only control yourself and what you do and how you react. So whether you're the board chair or the executive director, do your best to understand the other person's point of view, and then do whatever you need to do that you can do to build trust with that other person. And one of the most important things you can do is keep the lines of communication open and to not take things personally. But once you build that trust, then everything else is a lot easier.
All right. Yes, definitely trust and don't take things personally. Thank you. So thank you, panelists, for your wonderful thoughts here today. I think I'm just thrilled for the conversations that we've had and the participation, both from our participants here, but all of you and as panelists and adding to their thoughts and providing some messaging. And that's, I think, is really, really important when you tackle the work of whether from a board perspective or a staff perspective of a not-for-profit organization. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. So again, on behalf of all our, the community development unit and all the participants, I would like to thank you for sharing your knowledge, experience about working with the board as a senior staff person. I, really can't thank you enough for doing it. Wonderful conversations, a lot of insights, a lot of information that's going to be valuable for all of us moving forward. So, but I do want to, we're going to do one more thing with participants here before we go. And this is an important part too, is and I'm sure that Deanne and Denis and Michelle will be watching as well. What I'd like everybody to do is populate the chat box to this question. What were some things that you heard or points that were made in this panel session today that stood out and you're going to likely remember well when you start navigating that? We saw some of the questions, some of that difficult, challenging board staff relationship. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's no troubles in your organization, but what are some points that you heard today that you're going to remember well when navigating the dynamic board staff relationship in your own organization? If you could just put a few thoughts in like that into the chat box right now, that would be fabulous. So yeah, one is have fun. Communication is the key. I'm not alone. Yeah, open, honest, frank conversations. The importance of transparency. They're coming in fast and furious. Listen and open communications, all really important things. Focus on the overall tasks. Importance of developing goals. Boy, I think those are sound familiar, didn't they, from our conversation today? All of those. Yeah, keep them coming. Offer a performance review session. Oh, they like those performance reviews. We better get that into what we offer here in the community development unit. Feeling the connection to the mission. Yeah, I've certainly heard that a number of times from our panelists. Strategic plan is a key. Yes, we did hear the importance of the strategic plan through our conversation today. No doubt about it. Yeah, focusing on the overall task. So great little snapshot. Keep them coming, folks. I wish I read a few, but I think that's really. Thank you for sharing some of those things here. I'm probably going to wind her up right now because we are into our final time here. This session is part of a number of sessions that we have that's all geared for actually board and staff members of nonprofit organizations have knowledge, skills, and tools to be successful. You can see where even our conversation today around understanding the board staff relationship, having those conversations, I think hopefully we're towards that aim, towards that goal. But you can also see the number of other sessions, training sessions that we're going to have that also speak to other areas that if you would like to attend any of these sessions, you'll see the registration link that's going to be in the chat box here right now, real soon, that you can register for any of these upcoming sessions that we have coming up in the spring. So certainly feel free to click on that, to join us for other sessions that are coming up in the spring. And it certainly just doesn't end with these sessions. We also mentioned that we do have other things. If you enjoy the panel today, you're going to get 3 other panel members from a board perspective coming in the spring. And again, we're going to have our Building Consensus Online panel session again in the spring as well, again with 3 different panelists. So you hear different perspectives on that Building Consensus and then the dynamic board staff relationship. And once again, too, if for getting a hold of us, if you have a question, we have a consult line. Certainly feel free to call us on anything. We'd be more than happy to it's actually a live person. We'll get back to you. There's a YouTube channel for any of the recordings of our sessions. You could take a look at that, as well as our website and, of course, the registration link to all our sessions. So certainly, that's all those different ways to get a hold of us. And certainly, please, if you do like to get a hold of us, there's many different ways to do it. And finally, I would like to say again, on behalf of our community development unit and our panel today, thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us for this nonprofit bistro session. Hope you see you again for another one of our upcoming webinars. That'd be wonderful. And I do want to say as a final goodbye, take care, stay healthy. And again, I really mean this, all our communities have so much more because each of you find your work with not-for-profit organizations, whether that's with a board member or a staff member, and we all have so many more opportunities as a result of you doing that work. And so thank you for doing that. And this is bye for now, and hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming webinar. Take care.